Welcome to this component-free screencast on Neo-Marxist theories of social inequality. Neo-Marxist writers are those theorists who have attempted to adapt and extend the writings of Karl Marx in order to address some of the weaknesses of the traditional Marxist approach. And in this video, I'm going to consider two strands of Neo-Marxism. Firstly, we're going to look at a strand of Neo-Marxism that sought to account for the non-occurrence of revolution in advanced capitalist societies such as our own. And then secondly, the other strand of Neo-Marxism that we will consider has attempted to deal with the problem posed for Marx's prediction of class polarization by the growth of the middle classes. So the first strand of Neo-Marxism that we're going to consider emerged as it became clear that traditional Marxism had failed as a predictive theory. In other words, working class people had not developed class consciousness and created the revolution as Marx claimed that they would. Now this strand of Neo-Marxism is particularly exemplified by the Frankfurt School, and the Frankfurt School is a term that's used to describe a group of German neo-Marxist thinkers, including Theodor Adorno, who were particularly interested in the importance of the media and propaganda influencing people's attitudes and preventing revolutionary action by the working class. The Frankfurt School suggested that the media had turned culture into an industry, so that music and the arts simply became commodities that could be bought and sold in the same way as other manufactured products. And this, they argued, was increasingly dumbing down the arts and dumbing down culture. So they argued that the mass media were a toxic influence within capitalism, that they were responsible for a commercialized, popular or mass culture which revolves around superficial entertainment. And they argued that the impact of this culture industry on the consciousness of ordinary people was that it stifled creativity, it stifled people's imagination, and it undermined people's ability to think critically about the social conditions of their society. So according to this perspective, the culture industry being promoted by the mass media prevents the development of autonomous, independent individuals who can judge and decide consciously for themselves. In other words, it makes people stupid. And therefore, instead of being at the start of a knowledge age, we're at the precipice of the age of ignorance, according to this highly critical perspective. And therefore, from this neo-Marxist perspective, the main reason that Marx's revolution has not occurred in advanced capitalist societies, and to use this visual metaphor, the main reason why the working class remain as yet a sleeping giant is that the masses have been pacified by the pleasant, shallow entertainment that is constantly being drip-fed to them by the media, by the culture industry. Now there are some obvious problems with this neo-Marxist perspective that we considered last year in our unit on media sociology. Many people would consider this type of argument about the relationship between the media and the audience to be deeply pessimistic and patronizing. And many sociologists would argue that in practice, media audiences are much more critical and discerning than this neo-Marxist perspective gives them credit for. Let's now move on in the second part of the screencast to this other strand of neo-Marxism, which deals with the problem of the growth of the middle classes. Now, when we're considering the work of classical theorists, such as Karl Marx, it's always important to put their theoretical work into a historical context. And in Marx's time, it was the heyday of industrial development during the 19th century. And in this historical period, ownership of property and control of labour were synonymous. They were one and the same. And most jobs were either on farms or in factories. And therefore, during this period, lumping all of those people together who own productive resources into one class, this class that Marx referred to as the bourgeoisie, and then lumping everybody else together who worked on the farm or in factories and calling them the proletariat, that actually made a lot of sense during the period that Marx was writing. However, the nature of capitalism has changed a lot since the time of Karl Marx. For example, corporations have become much larger, much more bureaucratic, with a long multi-level chain of command. And ownership of corporations often lies in the hands of shareholders, some of whom will be foreign as well as domestic, and these shareholders often have no direct connection at all to the everyday operational workings of the businesses that they own. And therefore a feature of advanced capitalism is that very often ownership and management are separated. In other words, the powerful people who manage large businesses and control workers on a day-to-day basis are frequently not the same people who actually own the businesses. Yet in traditional Marxism, these managers would be referred to as part of the working class. Yet here we have a major problem, because it doesn't really make much sense to suggest that the chief executive officer, the senior manager of a large corporation, is in the same social class as their lowest paid employee. We can see, for example, in this diagram that there's a huge disparity in income if we compare senior managers of top corporations within the UK compared to the average income of a UK worker. It doesn't make much sense to think about these two groups as if they occupied the same social class position. So in light of these changes, more contemporary neo-Marxists have offered models that attempt to account for the existence of groups like senior managers and professional white-collar workers who are clearly in a different class position from the traditional manual working class. One such neo-Marxist writer is Eric Wright, and he's developed and updated the Marxist theory of social class by focusing on how much control members of different social classes have in the production process. And according to this perspective, there are 3 dimensions of control over economic resources in modern capitalist production that will allow us to identify the major classes that exist. And we can see those 3 dimensions on this particular slide. So firstly, there's the ability to control investments or money capital, so to make decisions about finance and investing in a business. Secondly, there's control over the physical means of production, so that's control over things like land, factories, offices. And then thirdly, there's the ability to control the workforce, so that's referred to as control over labour power. Now, as Marx asserted, those who belong to the capitalist class, to the bourgeoisie, have control over all 3 of these dimensions. They have control over money, they have control over land and factories, and they have control over their labour force. And in contrast, members of the proletariat, the working class, have control over none of them. But in between these 2 main classes are groups whose position is ambiguous. Groups like managers and professionals who, according to Wright, are in contradictory class locations. He uses that particular term because they're able to influence some aspects of production, but are denied control over others. So, for example, managers and professionals have to sell their labour power to their employers, to the bourgeoisie, in order to make a living, just as the proletariat also have to do. But at the same time, these managers and highly paid professionals have a greater degree of control over their work than most other workers. And also, they're in a position where they can manage and control the work of other workers. So Wright calls these class positions of managers, of professionals, contradictory because they're neither one thing or the other. They're neither capitalists nor workers, yet they share certain common features with each. So a large section of the population, 85 to 90% according to Wright, falls into the category of being an employee, of being somebody who has to sell their labour. Yet as Wright points out, within this population there is great diversity, from the traditional manual working class to highly paid managers. And in order to differentiate class locations, Wright takes two factors into account. Firstly, there's relationship to authority, and secondly, there's the possession of skills and expertise. So in relation to authority, the thing that Wright is getting at here is that many middle class workers, such as managers and supervisors, enjoy relationships towards authority that are much more privileged than the working class. So you've got certain types of middle class workers who actually assist in controlling the working class, yet at the same time remain under the control of capitalist owners. So these types of groups that have high levels of authority, they are both exploiters and exploited. Secondly, there are groups of middle class employees with skills and education that are in demand, and these types of middle class workers can exercise more power, more autonomy at work than people who have fewer skills and less education, and they can demand higher wages. So as we can see from this particular grid, based on these two dimensions, so level of authority at work, level of skills and education, Wright identifies 9 class locations for those people who are reliant on selling their labour within capitalism. And obviously this is a far more complex and nuanced way of understanding the class locations of employees compared to the traditional Marxist perspective that would simply lump all of these people together into a single exploited social class.